people, and welcome to the show. It's Tuesday night, and we have so much to talk about. But before I do, I always do the same intro, asking you to tell your friends, your family, your crew, your posse, your church community, or anybody who will listen to you to join our Patreon community and support the show. Of course, lots of people are seeing the show on other mediums, on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, and all these other places, but it's always best if they support the show through the Patreon platform. So let's get to it. Today's topics are, first, we're going to discuss Justice Clarence Thomas's dissent in the decision, one of the Supreme Court decisions that rejected one more of these, Trump appeals. But he made some commentary in that dissent that I think is particularly troubling, and I want to examine why it's troubling and to talk a little bit about the implications of all of that. Second thing I want to talk about is the Neera Tanden situation. If you have not been paying attention, Neera Tanden was Joe Biden's nominee for the Office of Management and Budget. It's a very powerful position. It is an administrative position that controls budget and puts numbers to what congressional proposals are so that people know what they're dealing with. But OMB has a lot of other administrative roles as well. And so it's an important role. It is a powerful role. And Neera Tanden is a woman of color. She's of Indian descent, and she was apparently part of Hillary Clinton's team. Has been around DC for quite some time, but she is a partisan. She's a partisan, and that there's nothing particularly problematic about that. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's going on with her and my thoughts about it. And of course, it's International Tuesday, so we have some international headlines to share with you because it's important that you pay attention to what's going on in the world. It may come back to bite us or affect us in a either positive or negative way. So let's definitely keep up with the international news. And not a lot of people like to talk about international topics, but I do. So let's start with Justice Thomas. For you, those of you who have not been paying attention, a whole bunch of the appellate court decisions that kicked out Donald Trump's various and sundry ridiculous claims got appealed to the Supreme Court. Now, when a case is appealed to the Supreme Court, there are several things that can be done. The court can, the court has, there's 9 justices, and they each have a role in deciding which cases they take. In order for the Supreme Court to take a case, take an issue, they have to have 5 of the 9 decide they want to take the issue. Right? And usually there's some key criterion as to why the Supreme Court would take an issue. Sometimes it's a case of first impression. What that means is an issue has arisen in the lower courts that there's just a hole in the law. It hasn't been addressed before. And the Supreme Court is essentially saying, okay, well, it's never been decided before. We're going to decide what this issue, this way or that way. It's a case of first impression. That is a reason for the Supreme Court to take up an issue. The second reason that there's for the Supreme Court to take up an issue is if there is conflict between the circuits. So, for example, the 9th Circuit's out in the West Coast in California and all of the West Coast states. The DC Circuit is in the District of Columbia. I'm sitting in the 11th Circuit, which is in southern states and Florida. And each circuit has its panel of judges, and they make decisions. And sometimes the same issue will come up in 2 different jurisdictions and 2 different circuits. And one circuit will say yes, and the next circuit will say no. And when there's a conflict between those circuits, the Supreme Court decides that conflict. Okay, so if there's a manifest incongruity between one circuit and another circuit, the Supreme Court will decide the decision. The other reasons that the Supreme Court will take a case is, sometimes they take death penalties appeals. They have a jurisdiction on that. Conflicts between the states. For example, my state of Florida is currently in litigation with the state of Georgia over water rights in the northern part of the state. There is, Florida shares a border with Georgia. And Georgia seems to be sucking up all the water, wants all the rights, the water of the river that kind of flows through there. But that water feeds the estuary and the sort of river, the seabeds or whatever in North Florida, and it affects our fisheries and our oysters and like other stuff. Anyway, so there's a whole dispute over water usage. Now, that is exactly the kind of case that the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction in, which is what these 19 attorney generals tried to claim in their case to the Supreme Court to ask it to throw out the election results. Remember how they said, well, Texas brings a suit against Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Georgia to throw out their election results. That's what it's like, hey, it's a dispute between the states. The Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. The problem here is, even though that was a dispute between the states, it was also a dispute that called into play a concept that does not exist in the Constitution. There is no such thing as I, state A, kick out votes from state B. That's not a thing. I, state A, have conflict with state B about our border, water usage, pollution, gun trafficking across our border. Like, that's the kind of thing that the Supreme Court would step in and say, okay, cool, we're going to deal with this. But I just don't like how you run your state, so run it the way I want you to is not a thing. That's not a thing. And that's what the Supreme Court said. It was like, no, we don't do that. That's not a thing. And so that's one of the reasons that a court will take up an issue. So in this particular, but the other thing is if they just think something is wrongly decided, if an appeal court decides something and they say, hey, this is just wrongly decided, we're going to go and reverse what you did. But you need 5 justices to agree to do that. And that's just to review it. That's not to say that they're going to agree or disagree with the decision, right? Because then they argue it, they brief it, and blah, blah, blah. Well, so what happened in this particular situation? I think this was the appeal from Pennsylvania's, from the circuit court there, and they wanted to, Donald Trump wanted to throw out all the election results in Pennsylvania. The Supreme Court refused to take up the case. Right? It said, no, we're not taking this. Now, the reason that was given by the majority is that this is moot, and this is not going to change any election outcome. But there was a dissent, and sometimes justices will write a commentary as to why they think the case should have been taken up or not. And in this particular situation, Justice Thomas wrote a dissent in which he thought the case should be taken up, and what he used to justify his position was a bunch of total nonsense crap and repetition of big lie voter fraud memes. And I'm incredibly troubled by that. So he cites some things to justify his opinion that vote by mail is full of voter fraud. And he cites voter fraud that took place with vote by mail in North Carolina. What he doesn't make clear is that was Republicans who went out and harvested ballots. That was not voters trying to act in a fraudulent way. Right? He cited a couple other circumstances, again, that had nothing to do with mass voter fraud. So he asserted something that is a GOP talking point, but used examples that don't support the point. Now, the reason this troubles me is because Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny, was a funder and supporter of the January 6th rally and consequent insurrection. Now, I can't say with any certainty that she was aware of what the overall plan for the day was. I can say that she, after the fact, expressed support for the insurrectionists. That is a fact. It is a fact that she did contribute financially to the actual rally. That is also a fact. We don't know whether she contributed out of her own funds or marital funds, which would be a real problem to have a Supreme Court justice using marital funds to support an insurrection. I think that'd be real problematic. But there's absolutely no question that Clarence Thomas's wife is an absolute partisan and is a partisan who echoes these talking points of the extreme right. And to hear those talking points weave themselves into a Supreme Court decision is extremely problematic. Nobody's ever going to claim that Clarence Thomas is unbiased, right? We all know that he has his biases, and as do the other justices, they have biases too. But there's a certain degree of professionalism, and there's a certain degree of evidentiary basis that we expect from our Supreme Court justices. If they're going to say we agree with this or we don't agree with this, they ought not be citing to examples that actually do not support the position that they're asserting. So what's happening is that a Supreme Court justice is becoming a talking head or a mouthpiece for extreme right lies about our elections. Now, no doubt that in the future, that Georgia and all these states that are trying to pass draconian voter suppression laws to stop vote by mail, to stop early vote and Sunday vote, they're going to cite Justice Thomas's dissent as their justification. Well, the Supreme Court justice said there's rampant voter fraud, so I guess we're right. No, he cited in the dissent, which means that he's in the minority. And number two, What he cited to support his position does not actually support his position. It was intellectually stupid and lazy, and it was purely partisan politics. Honestly, I think that given the proximity of his wife to the big lie and the insurrection, I think Justice Thomas ought to have recused himself from the case. He's a little too close, especially if his dollars went to support that effort, right? He's a little too close. I think that it was a bad call for Justice Roberts not to demand that he recuse himself from the decision. Perhaps they didn't make a big kerfuffle about it because, again, they didn't grant cert. They didn't take up the issue. So it's like kind of no harm, no foul. But there's still a document out there. There is still a decision by a Supreme Court justice saying that the predicate of the big lie has some merit to it, which it does not. And so, I've never been a fan of Justice Thomas. I think he's a total waste of space on the Supreme Court. Everybody knows I dislike him. I dislike his jurisprudence. He doesn't ever ask questions. He's not an intellectually curious justice, which I find very odd. But when his wife's politics start to permeate his decisions, it's time for him to recuse himself. And that's Pam's position on it. If you like what you just heard, you can find out so much more and hear so much more on my Patreon channel, patreon.com/PamKeithFL. That's where you hear the rest of this discussion, and there's lots more to share.